Rome, 64 AD. The sky turned black before the sun could rise. Smoke crawled across rooftops. Flames danced like demons in the streets. And high above it all, the emperor played his music. That emperor was Nero, a man remembered not for what he built, but for what he destroyed. Some say he was a madman, others a misunderstood artist, but all agree on one thing. When Rome burned, Nero watched. To understand why, you have to go back, before the fire, before the screams, back to the day a prophecy was born. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. That was his name before the crown. His father died when he was just 3, a cruel man who once said, "Nothing good will ever come of this boy. He will be a public disaster." Not a warning, a prediction. His mother Agrippina didn't grieve. She had her eyes on the empire. Ambitious, cold, and calculating. She knew how to survive Rome's poison-soaked politics. She had royal blood and a hunger for power that could swallow anyone whole. So she seduced her uncle. That uncle was Emperor Claudius. She married him, convinced him to adopt her son, and then she cleared the path. Claudius's own son, Britannicus, poisoned. Claudius himself, a plate of poisoned mushrooms. And just like that, 16-year-old Nero became emperor. But Nero wasn't ready for power. He was raised on philosophy and poetry, not war and betrayal. His early reign was guided by Seneca, a wise tutor, and Burrus, a seasoned general. Together, they kept him balanced for a while. In those early years, Nero was generous. He lowered taxes, banned secret trials, gave public performances, and even pardoned enemies. Rome cheered. They thought they had another golden age. But Nero didn't want to rule. He wanted to perform. He sang, acted, and played the lyre like the world was his audience. He believed he was born not to lead, but to be adored. That obsession with performance twisted him. He couldn't handle criticism. He couldn't share the stage. And standing in the spotlight with him was his mother. Agrippina still tried to control him. She wanted influence, wanted to steer the empire through her son. But Nero began to see her as a threat, so he plotted her death. First, he tried to kill her with a collapsing boat. She survived. Then he ordered assassins. They stabbed her in her own villa. Before they struck, she looked at the blade and said, "Strike the womb that bore him." And they did. Nero had murdered his mother. Rome was stunned. He told the Senate it was self-defense. And the Senate, too afraid to speak truth, applauded his courage. From that point on, Nero changed. His wife Octavia, beloved by the people, was accused of adultery and exiled. Later, he ordered her execution. They brought her severed head to his mistress, Poppaea. He married Poppaea, but she too met a cruel fate. While pregnant, she angered Nero during an argument. He kicked her in the stomach. She died a few days later. And Nero, he wept. Then found a young boy who resembled her, castrated him, dressed him as Poppaea, and called him his new wife. It didn't matter if Rome gasped. It didn't matter if the Senate whispered. Nero was no longer a prince in chains. He was a god in his own mind. He started building monuments to himself, golden palaces, statues taller than temples, rooms lined with mirrors so he could see himself from every angle. He taxed the rich, drained the treasury, forced nobles to donate fortunes to his art, and if anyone opposed him, they vanished. Senators, generals, philosophers, even Seneca, the man who raised him, were forced to take their own lives. Seneca bled to death in a bath, silent, stoic, knowing the man he once mentored had become a monster. Rome began to rot under Nero's rule, not just in politics, but in spirit. People laughed less, markets grew quiet, the streets echoed with fear and silence. But Nero didn't hear the silence. He only heard applause, even if he had to force it. He performed on stage across the empire. For hours he sang while the audience, forbidden to leave, sat weeping in the dark. Women gave birth during his performances. Men faked heart attacks just to escape. And still, Nero smiled. Because in his mind, he wasn't a tyrant. He was a misunderstood genius, a god king, an artist above the law. But deep down, Nero knew the applause was hollow. The people were restless. The senators hated him. The army doubted him. He needed something bigger, a grand stage, a rebirth. He looked at the cramped, dirty city of Rome, and in its ashes, he saw a masterpiece. Soon the fires would begin. 64 AD, a small fire in the merchant district. A few wooden stalls caught flame, but the wind was cruel that night. Within hours, it was an inferno. Rome burned for 6 days. Flames turned temples to rubble. Statues melted into puddles. Corpses lay in the streets, half buried in ash. Even the Tiber River couldn't drown the fire. People screamed for help. Mothers clutched their children, running barefoot over burning stone. Fathers wept, watching their homes collapse. The smoke turned the sky red. Rome had become hell. And where was Nero? Some said he was miles away in Antium. Others whispered he was seen on a rooftop in the city, dressed in theater robes, playing his lyre, singing about the fall of Troy as Rome burned beneath him. He did nothing for days. When he returned, he didn't bring water. He brought songs. He performed for the homeless and starving, and demanded applause. 10 of Rome's 14 districts were destroyed. 3 were wiped off the map. Only one thing remained untouched by the fire: Nero's palace. The moment the flames died, he announced his vision. A new Rome, a grander, richer, golden Rome, starting with his palace at the city's heart. It would be called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a private lake, walls covered in pearls and ivory, a rotating dining room that mimicked the stars. At the center, a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of himself, the Colossus of Nero. Rome was ashes, and he was building a shrine to himself. But people began to talk. The timing, the untouched palace grounds, the arrogance. Whispers turned to fury. To stop a revolt, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one. The Christians, a new cult to most Romans. Strange, secretive, loyal to one god instead of the emperor. Nero blamed them for the fire, said they wanted to purge the old world to bring about their kingdom. And so the slaughter began. Christians were arrested by the hundreds, torn apart by dogs, crucified in the streets, set on fire and used as human torches at Nero's garden parties. He walked among them, laughing, while their screams lit the night. But even that didn't satisfy the people. They weren't afraid anymore. They were disgusted. The Senate began to stir. Generals looked toward Rome with clenched jaws. Nero's once loyal men plotted in the shadows. In 68 AD, the cracks finally split open. The governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, declared rebellion. He called Nero a disgrace, called for the Senate to act, and this time, they did. The Senate stripped Nero of his title, declared him an enemy of the state. Even the Praetorian Guard, his personal bodyguards, abandoned him. Nero ran, not to a palace, not to a temple, but to a friend's villa outside Rome. There, in a small room surrounded by silence, Nero stared at the walls. He begged someone, anyone, to kill him. No one would. Even in death, they feared touching him. So Nero took the dagger himself. As soldiers closed in, he pressed the blade to his throat. His final words, "What an artist dies in me." And then, silence. Nero died not with a roar, but with a whisper, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian line. A man born from prophecy, raised by ambition, and destroyed by ego. But his death wasn't the end of the chaos. Rome spiraled into civil war. One emperor after another rose and fell in blood. It would take years before the empire found stability again. And yet, Nero's legacy didn't die. Centuries later, some Roman citizens still believed he was alive. Legends claimed he had fled east and would one day return. A phantom emperor, a ghost. Even early Christians feared a Nero redivivus, Nero reborn, as a sign of the world's end. That's the power he left behind. Not statues, not temples, but fear, madness. A name that meant fire and betrayal. Nero, the emperor who played while his people burned, the artist who painted with ash, the ruler who became a monster, not in legend, but in life.